So thank you everyone for coming today, and thank you to everyone who's watching on the Twitch stream. The name of our panel is Finding the Right VC for Me, and so we have a distinguished panel of VCs up here that if you guys want to take a second to kind of introduce yourselves, where you're from, and kind of what stage of companies you guys are looking at.
Looks like I've been nominated to go first. So I'm Trey Vassallo. I've been an investor for 15 years, which is kind of crazy to say. Before that, I was an entrepreneur. I actually co-founded a company in 2000 called Good Technology. And before that, I was a geeky engineer. So I love solving a good, hard problem. I was at Kleiner Perkins for 11 years, where I basically learned how to be a venture capitalist. And last year closed our new venture fund, Defy.vc. So we're a $150 million early stage venture fund, which means we want to write $3 to $6 million checks into companies that have had some seed funding likely, and are raising a $6 to $10 million round. And we like to lead investments, hop on the board, and really work with those companies to dial in their product market fit, build the team, professionalize the board, and ultimately get the company in a mode where they're raising growth capital.
Thanks. I'm Shruti Gandhi. I run a fund called Trae Ventures, Array.vc. Prior to this, I was an engineer turned founder turned investor. I also spent a bunch of time prior to this investing in a corporate VC at Samsung and then at True Ventures. I started Array about 3 years ago, but we invest also early, but a little different early is what we decided. We should have sat in a line. We should have swapped. I invest in something called pre-seed. I know Charles is talking about this lay of the land after this talk, but it's first check into the company, still early stage, but a different early stage than Trey. And then I'll let Ted talk.
Do you want to switch seats?
We should do it.
Yeah, okay. So I'm Ted Wang. I'm a partner at Cowboy Ventures, and we are a seed stage fund, a traditional seed stage fund. So I think it was exactly right. We're sort of right in between these two fund sizes, which means we write checks from $500,000 to $1.5 million. Where we are positioned, I think, in the venture ecosystem is I think you can look at the firms and see on one sort of pole you have what I call full service firms. There are firms that have like an array, like you have partners, investment partners who sit on top, and then they have a whole array of services that they use, and they bundle the money with those services. The most notable of those firms, I think, is Andreessen Horowitz. But I also think in our segment, First Round Capital does this really quite well. And we are on the complete other pole. We're what we call a craft firm, and what that means is it's really just the partners. We currently have no one else at the firm, so there is no. If you call, there is no one else to answer the phone. But we typically have a number.
What's the number?
Yeah, it's my cell phone number. That's the only number that there is. So. We do have a small team that we have that we're building, but in general, our idea is we're going to invest in just a handful of companies every year. We'll probably do 3 to 4 per partner, and there are 2 partners. My better half is Aileen Lee, who is the founder of our firm, and then myself. And we want to then just spend our time focused on providing the services ourselves. So we're sort of helping you with whatever the projects that you're working on are, and then accessing our own network. So obviously we're not deep subject matter experts on every topic. So we try to think who in our network is the right person to help, and then we Shanghai those people into helping our portfolio companies.
Okay, thank you guys. So obviously the topic of finding like the right VC for a company is a huge topic, and you can go in any number of directions. So I figured we might want to structure our conversation today around what companies should think about, before they actually reach out to VCs, like the pre-funding, what they should think about after they receive the money, and then as what they should be thinking about like as they learn to scale. And to kick things off, I figure we might as well start with the question that almost all of these guys are thinking, like, what can they do to be successful? Like, how can they successfully pitch a VC and, basically get your money?
So maybe I'll jump in with a first bit of advice. So, we get a lot of inbounds on a daily basis, and the ones that rise to the top are the ones that are personal introductions from someone we know, our network. And so, I always encourage entrepreneurs to do the spidering diligence and digging and really figuring out, okay, if I want to talk to this venture firm, first of all, figure out which partner is the most relevant to what you're doing. Because the thing that has shocked me is that firms, it's kind of a secret, but partners within firms are terrible at sharing opportunities with each other. And they often will just say, well, this doesn't look very interesting to me, even though it might be perfect for another partner. So know who you want to target going in, and then use your network to try and figure out who knows that person the best, that can give a warm introduction and vouch for you and tell that person that, they might want to check out what you're doing.
I think two things. First, just try to understand, to Trey's point, the background of the investor you're reaching out to. And if the firm has made an investment in that category, you want to avoid that firm, because most firms don't want to do a competitive investment in the same category. So those are a lot of the pre-work kind of things you can do. For our firm, we do cold inbound meetings and warm intros. So 45% of our deal flow is new founders just reaching out to us. One of our most recent deal was a company called Zendar in the high definition radar tech space, cold inbound to us. So we do that. We do that, and I do like, dedicating time to those meetings. But the ones in that category that bubble up for us is areas I like to personally invest in. And if you are not in that space, and if you're reaching out for a completely different set of sectors that we do not like to focus on at Array, then that's one area we do not like to, you may not get the time with us. The second is, how much do you want to work with this VC? I think the answer has been very common. It's like you're going to work with this VC for 10 years, so pick someone you want to work with closely, and all that wisdom has been great. But the space we are investing in is changing quite a bit as well. The pre-seed seed stage, right? I think it's usually a syndicate of people, and you don't necessarily work with the entire syndicate all the time for 10 years. So you want to work with one or two firms that you want to work with for for a good amount of time. But the remaining set of investors, the angels, the smaller funds, I think you can think about how these folks can bring to the round and add to the round, and what you're looking for to circle that up well. So those are the two things I would focus on first, and then we can go into that more later.
Yeah, the thing I would recommend is that you have to tell a great story. And what I mean by that is, obviously, when you get a meeting with a venture capitalist, you're going to want to convey your ideas. I mean, and convince that person that he or she should be writing you a check. And what I find people do, the one mistake I commonly see is, I call it kind of the book report story, which is like, remember when you were in 4th grade and you had to do the book report, and you'd say like, I read this book and this is what it was about. And so they sort of tell like a very formulaic story. And what you have to realize is, we're seeing 7, 8 folks in any given day. And so I think you want to think about, how can this story stand out? Not just, am I conveying the right information, but am I weaving it together in a way that's compelling and is going to get the person's interest? Because this is actually a very important thing that we're trying to assess. Because whether you're closing, eventually you're going to have to recruit candidates, in some cases close deals, definitely raise more money, win over partnerships, and how well you can articulate a story that is interesting, is unique, it kind of gets all your points across in a clear and compelling way. And I actually think there's, I don't want to overstate this, but I think it's really important that the first couple minutes be good. And I think that's something where people really screw it up, because they start with like, this is the history of our company. We were founded a year ago, and it's like, okay, I'm falling asleep now. And I mean, look, there should be some hook. I think Gina talked about hooks in her presentation for customers, but I think it's true in these meetings, right? You want to kind of stand out and tell a story that's memorable and compelling and makes it interesting, and it makes the person kind of lean forward.
I was just going to say, and don't forget to connect too, because this is, I think, what you want is that venture person to leave the room and go, that was an awesome meeting, right? And it's a generalized kind of emotional feeling as well as an analytical one. And I found that a lot of times that comes from the personal connection, which may have happened in the beginning, common connections or common interests that are separate from the story, but also really important.
Right. I mean, what we know about decision making, human decision making, is that we're not machines, we're not computers, we're not calculating things, and so there's a lot of unconscious stuff that are churning in our minds, and so making that connection, and whether it's some kind of positive emotional connection or some resonance with the story or something that makes the venture person feel like, okay, this person's really, is deeply passionate about this. You're obviously have chosen to do this for a living, so you're putting your heart and soul into it, and let that show. And then the second piece of telling the story, I just want to emphasize, is you really have to have this story nailed. It's got to be tight. I think people put not enough time into sort of rehearsing, so that the thing tends to meander, tends to be really long. The goal isn't to tell everything that you know about your company. I mean, we're going to ask questions, and so it's telling a relatively, you about how much time you have somewhere between a half hour and 45 minutes, and you want to make sure that during that time period, you're telling the story in the way that you want it framed up. And of course, then behind that story, every possible question you want to have the answer to. You want to be predicting. So I like to see like short decks with a bunch of appendices in the back, like something. What's an amazing experience is when I go, well, what about blah 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 blah, and I go, oh, okay, I have this in the appendix. Here it is, slide 27. It's like, okay, this person really knows. They've really thought through these critical questions, and that sends me the signal like, wow, they're really thinking this thing through.
And actually, to jump off that, are there examples that that you're able to talk about of companies that have come in and nailed that story? Because I feel as if that is a common problem for a lot of startups, where like they know they have to nail the narrative, they know they have to pull the story together, but half the time they present, they think they've done that. And so, what are what would be some clear examples of things that have worked for you guys, or even things that haven't?
I mean, it's simple. The ones that made it are your portfolio companies. Sorry.
If there's a story that's stuck out for you.
But I think for me, that's clear, like why now is very important. I often say that, there's two types of decks. The first is hey, I want to meet you. Can I get 10 minutes or 15 minutes, a half hour, whatever your time? And that's when I'm looking for this short deck, which is very much what you do, why you think you're going to be an expert in the industry, and do you know your competitors well? Whatever industry you're trying to tackle, do you know the landscape, and why do you think you're better, right? Like, I think I'm looking for that quick gist in that short intro deck, and then why now, right? Like, you could be solving the paper, taking away the paper pencil, whatever problem in a particular industry. But like, why is this relevant today versus 10 years ago when internet was invented? What's the word I'm looking for? But so that's to me something where a founder has to really convey that in the first intro deck. And then if we meet, the real story of why you have an edge, what's your differentiation, and those are the companies that make it to the more follow-on meetings of diligence, and then we end up investing. I don't think it's one company that doesn't run, but there is some resources out there from old decks from companies that are, unicorn or whatever so-called companies today, that have what their decks look like today, and it's good to refer to those and kind of see how their journey evolved.
Yeah, I can give one specific example. There's a company we funded that's called Depot. And Depot is going to make fleet servicing software for autonomous vehicles, meaning, okay, there are a bunch of people trying to get these things on the road and get customers to buy them. And then the question is like, well, what happens when they run out of gas? And what happens when someone throws up in the back seat? And and what happens when someone dings them? And so and so what they're trying to build is a network that the cars can talk to. So the car is going to say, hey, I need cleaning. The sensor says, hey, we detect some foul smell or whatever. And then we will be connecting them. Our software will connect them to the service providers that they have contracts with to do cleaning in the case of the example. And what I asked him, I was like, well, why is now the right time? And this is what triggered the thought. And he had a slide on it that kind of addressed it, and then behind that slide, he had in the appendix a whole slide about, hey, here's like a flow chart of how you can think about the right time to build this business. So he said, we could wait. He's like, look, without getting into it, he said, like, there are demo programs now. We could say, okay, we won't really care about those demos because there's no real money in it. But if we did that and someone else were in the demos, then that person would have a real unfair advantage. And what can we learn from the demos? I mean, it was clear that they had really hacked through all the way the problem. So we had a kind of a generalized answer and then a much deeper answer in the appendix. I thought that was it's a great example.
So I just wanted to add one little bit of color. I see a lot of presentations that don't do a really good job of illustrating the customer experience of the product that's being developed or the service that's being developed. It's kind of at a high level and it talks about the technology or the business model. And the most important thing is the problem you're solving for whom. And so creating as much color and as much, if you don't have a product, mock it up. If you have a demo, show it, lead with it. If you have a prototype, make sure it's front and center because one thing venture capitalists are pretty bad at is visualizing what's in your head, and you're spending all your time thinking about it. So all these details are really clear to you, but with fresh eyes, I always, if someone doesn't come out right away and say, this is what the experience is like for my customer, then I'm spending all the time in my head making a mental model of what I think that looks like, and I'm not listening to what you're saying. So I'd say the common theme in the presentations that really get my attention are ones that are really good at illustrating that right up front.
And kind of as a reverse to that question, so what are things that people should not do? Like what annoys you guys? Like what should people just avoid doing to kind of help their chances at success?
Yeah, the one I see, and name dropping is a really dangerous one. I think people think, well, I know this person or I've met this person before. Or, it scares. That's my pet peeve.
So one thing, so the Q&A, so I always love to ask a lot of questions, and you learn a lot about how an entrepreneur is thinking about their company, how they interact with their team, how they respond to criticism through good question asking. And so usually, especially if I'm getting into like a second or third meeting, I try to pick out something where, I might not fully agree or might not see the entrepreneur's kind of opinion in the same way they do, and I sort of push on it a little bit. And so what I guess would annoy me are when entrepreneurs come back and they dismiss it or don't want to answer it now or kind of revert back to their script, meaning I can't get them off script. I can't really get them to have a dialogue or debate with me, which says to me they haven't really thought through this, have they? Because they're just panicking and kind of going back to, okay, I'm just going to go back to what I know, what I want to say. And so, I think, so that's where I do see a lot of these things that, make it easy for me to turn companies down.
Usually for companies that we are excited about, I try to do more of an academic Q&A approach before even our first meeting, which I think saves a lot of time for everyone. And that is why the intro deck to me is helpful, and I go back and forth and I'm sure you have an FAQ somewhere, just send that over to me. And I think that engagement from the founder really weeds out two things. One is their interest in selling to me, and wanting to work with me is very important. I think I don't want to work with someone who doesn't want to work with me. It's just very difficult in this industry to be in that world. So that's, for me, the other side of pet peeve. If someone's like, let's just meet and I'll tell you in person, and that's fine, but if they don't address it, then it just to me means that they're avoiding that topic.
Yeah, because it seems like you need a fit anyway, just because this is a long-term investment. It's not like you guys sign a check and you disappear. You are in it for you're there for 10 years. You're trying to figure this out together. And it kind of jumping off of that, you guys, there's a fit, there's interest, you invest. you're continuing the relationship with entrepreneur, like, either like as a board member or as an advisor. I was wondering if you guys can talk a bit about, like, how you guys see that relationship with founders.
Sure, I'm happy to go first. So I actually think this is a really important conversation to have, when you're going through the closing process or the diligence process with a new investor, is what are you looking for from them? What do you want that relationship to be? And it's going to change, throughout your history. Sometimes you're going to need a lot of communication. I have this conversation up front with all of our entrepreneurs, and with some, we meet weekly, and it's sort of a more casual check-in, and it's a lot of listening, empathy, kind of question asking, how can we be helpful, and then that's punctuated with kind of more board meetings with bigger deliverables. And so I think, it really changes, because sometimes you just want that person to be out of the way and supportive and that sort of thing. So, I think a couple of key things is that your investors want to help you, or most of them want to help you, and you should select them for their ability to help you. And that also means you need to put them to work. So ask them to help you. Give them very specific things that you need help with. A lot of times it turns out if you ask for something very specific, I need help with recruiting, I need help with introductions to these companies, they absolutely want to help you, and it feels good when you can help somebody. And so just be really clear about what you need.
I usually tell my companies to have an update, whatever the rhythm might be. Some like to do it monthly, some like to do it quarterly. This is in addition to whatever other interactions you have, but it's documented in one place. But then with that update, I try to ask them to start with a template of what we need from you, because end of the day, that is what I want the update for. And that really triggers a lot of other, I tell my companies, I'm your champion, I'm your sponsor, I'm out there talking to a lot of people, investors, customers, and if I don't know what's going on in your business day to day or weekly or monthly or whatever I think the frequency I should at whatever given time you're going through, then it's very hard for me to represent you. And so that update is not just it's not one way, it's both ways. It's what do you need, and what is your update generally? And for that too, we have a template, and I like to really follow that generally.
Yeah, I think one thing that gets lost oftentimes in this conversation is just that you have good value alignment. You have to sort of, and I think that's a hard one to actually nail down exactly how that works. But I mean, as Michelle said, we're stuck with these people for a long time, and so it's good to be sure that you guys agree on what this journey is about and what are the core principles. Why are we in this to begin with? Like, what motivates you? What are the things that you want? How do you define success? How do you feel when? And I think, look, this is all if you have the luxury of having multiple choices. So I don't want to just kind of blow by that question. I mean, obviously, you're going to have to take money. If you're looking for money, you might not have a whole array of choices, and that might put you in a difficult position. But to the extent that you can qualify people and try to work with people who see the world in a similar way and you feel like are going to be supportive, I am often surprised that people who take money before they due diligence on the investors. I mean, most of us have been around for a long time. I'm basically a fossil, and so I mean, there are tons of people you can call, and like it's not like you can look on the internet and see who I worked with, and you can find these people. It's not hard, and just to make sure that the people are whom they represent themselves to be, because that is not always the case. I think there are a lot of people who, there are some like widely known secrets that certain people are just total jerks, and you'd rather not take any money than work with them, and the problem is, if you make that mistake, you're stuck with those people for a long time, and that could become a couple of pretty unproductive years of your life.
It's harder to get rid of an investor than a co-founder. So, like, put it into perspective.
Or a spouse.
Yeah.
So what tips do you guys have for people to kind of evaluate like that information that they're getting? Because it's like you can do the research and you're going to hear lots of different things. You're going to hear lots of advice from different people. Like, what advice do you guys have for zoning in on what's important?
I mean, to the extent you actually have some choices and you want to evaluate those choices, call people who in whom the investor had invested in the past, or if they're new. I've only been doing this for a year and a half, so but for 20 years prior to that, I was a lawyer here in town. So there are hundreds of people whom I can put you in touch with, and or who you should be able to find yourself, who can tell you, yeah, Ted, jerk.
And so kind of moving along a little bit further in the process, like, as people are pitching and, and trying to seal deals, like, what benchmarks should they be presenting to you guys? Like, both at an early stage and also, further along in the process? Like,
in order?
Yeah.
For our stage array, it's a bit unusual, but we like to, the story typically is the founder has some agitation around a problem, and they've lived and breathed that problem in the industry for a while. So they've tried to work on solving that problem in their companies, and they've been, I call it agitated workforce. So they have this agitation for a while, and then from there on they say, okay, I don't think there's anything in the market that is solving this problem. I'm gonna go fix it myself. While they're drinking tea or coffee with their friends, one of their first or second or third customers come through that way. It's usually their friend saying, I have the same problem. I think if you build it, I'll buy it. That's when they have their friends with their first, second, third customer and a conviction to quit their job. And then they're product building and kind of lost in that process and forgetting to build their pipeline, which is when Array comes in and says, okay, let us help you think through your second wave of customers. Who's your fourth, fifth, 10th customer? That is our general process. So very early on, oftentimes we are the folks trying to help you think through what you're pricing, how are you going to bundle, which industry are you going to go sell after. So those very early days of you building your company and thinking about what you're going to be, you usually, the founders usually don't have an office. We're meeting at a coffee shop, my office, whatever that is. But that's where we come in. That's pre-seed stage generally.
Yeah, I think it's hard to talk about specific metrics, because in general, because every company is different, right? Like a consumer thing or an enterprise software thing or a hardware thing are going to have extraordinarily different metrics. So I'm just going to focus on kind of the big three things that I think every venture capital looks at, which are the market, the product, and the team, right? And so the real question is, like, how can you help us validate all the things that we want to know, right? That there is a big market, right? So I'll use Depot as an example because I talked about it earlier, right? Depot is going to do fleet servicing software for autonomous vehicles. Are there going to be a lot of autonomous vehicles on the road? Okay, yeah, great. And they had in the deck they walked through that in a lot of details. They showed the reports and timing and whatnot. And then, how is this product going to work, right? And so now look, if you have a sort of enterprise software product and you have a couple customers, that's really good, right? If you have no customers but you have 20 people who said they'd pilot it, that's the next stage down. You have to kind of show whatever it is you have that gets someone comfortable that there's a market and that this product is going to solve a problem in that market. And then I also think you have to talk about yourself, and the right way to do it is that, tell what, with sort of like, this is what I've done in my life. Like this is the thing that, like, almost all the time you're going to be every founder was a first-time founder at some point. So we're not expecting I've run a bunch of companies, but I've done the following things that make it likely that I will be successful at running this company. And I think, one of the things I just look for is, does this person have a very high activity level, right? Like, I mean, it's like, if I wouldn't matter to me if you're like, I ran Model UN at my school. Like, okay, like at least you're keeping yourself out of trouble and being busy, not playing Xbox all day. So.
Well, so I actually agree with Ted that, this notion of there being a magic metric or number, is a fallacy. It's not true, and it's really different depending on all sorts of things. When it comes to metrics, though, that I like to track within a company that I'm working with, it's really specific to a couple of different things. Usually there are a set of top risks, things that are going to that could kill the company, that we're desperately trying to figure out an answer to, so that we can reduce risk, ultimately move the company forward, raise another round at a higher valuation. And so those top risks are always front and center. And so usually then what we do is we do customize and come up with some kind of visual dashboard of a bunch of different things that factor into how we track how we're doing against those top risks. And we try to make them as measurable as possible. So numbers are always good, but not all of them are. Actionable is key. But I think the point is, it is kind of crafted through conversation with your board and investors to come up with what you think those are, and then realize they're going to change. What was a really good metric to measure may not be going forward once you've hit a certain thing, or once you've realized maybe it was the wrong thing to track. So, but you can't work on what you don't measure, which is that really famous and important point. So it is a good forcing function to have as you manage your business.
Well, I have some more questions, but I also want to throw out to the audience and also to the Twitch channel in case there are people online that have questions.
I'm sorry, so I need a microphone. It's okay. So I was reading a Harvard Business School review that more than 75% of startups, venture-backed startups, are bound to fail. It's a very broad question. So how do you measure your success? How do you know that, okay, I'm not a victim of this?
Just to repeat the question really quick for anyone who might not be able to hear. So that it's commonly known that there's a HBS stat that's 75% of venture funded companies are going to fail. So how do you actually measure success and track yourself against that?
Yeah, is the question for us or for the companies? For us? Oh, that we pick the ones that don't. No, I mean, look, I actually think if there was a great panel where I heard someone say, I haven't invested in a company that's failed, and the other.
You're not trying hard enough.
Yeah, you're not trying hard. I mean, we need to take big risks. So let's keep talking about Depot because I like it, but Depot could be completely wrong. The timing could be wrong. I made an effective bet that now is the time to build a company to connect autonomous vehicles to services. Right. That is a fundamental risk. I know that it's unknown. It's unknown and unknowable today whether this was right or wrong. If it's wrong, we're going to lose all our money, and that's okay. I mean, I won't be happy, but I think you have to be willing to make bets. I think where you're not doing well is if you didn't understand. Oh, this was a time. This was a critical risk. If you miss, and there are always going to be exogenous events, outside things that happen that just change the whole landscape very quickly. But in general, the real question is well, what risk? For me, the way I think about it is what risks do I know that I'm taking on, and I'm willing to bear, and is the reward worthwhile? And hopefully I won't be getting surprised. That's sort of how I would think about it.
Yeah, we actually expect to fail. And to Ted's point, if you're not failing, then you're not taking big enough risks. I think the key is that you can only lose 1 times your money, but you stand to gain multiples. So I think part of what's important to us as venture capitalists is when we see companies not trending in the right direction and having problems, to not necessarily throw good money after bad. And a lot of people sort of just end up kind of going with momentum as opposed to stopping and asking the really hard question: is it should we find a soft landing or home for this company or not? And so I think that's a conversation that a lot of folks in Silicon Valley are even afraid to bring up. But when you think about it, if you can find a home sometimes when things are not working, then everyone gets their time back, including the entrepreneur that can then go start a new opportunity.
Yeah, I think for this audience too, I would add, a lot of people who pitch venture capitalists will say, like, this isn't that risky, and we've sort of de-risked this for this reason or that reason. That's not that attractive to us. I mean, honestly, because first of all, I just don't believe it. Like, if you're starting something, if this were are there a bunch of low risk, high reward opportunities that just no one else has found in the world? Like, it seems like something you would see at like late night infomercial.
Okay, so we're going to take a question from online.
Yeah, I think to kick off, we'll start with some online questions. Can I borrow your mic real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah, to kick off, we'll do a question from Twitch, and then we'll go to the audience. Maybe we'll alternate, because you have a couple questions from Twitch. The first is from Vector Leopoldovich 12. There's underscores in there, but I'll let you figure out where those are. How much does reputation matter if the person has a good idea or plan?
I think it matters a ton. I think it matters a lot, because what I do, the homework that I do. Let me talk about my flow, the workflow that I have. I meet companies, and then I decide I'm going to spend more time on this or not. And usually, the way I decide it is, are there two more interesting things that I'm working on? And if they are, I won't spend time on it. So because I only have capacity for 2 at any given time. And when we decide to spend time on something, I really divide it into sort of 2 different things I'm looking at. Something about the product and the market, and then I'm diligencing the founders. And I'm going to call and what I do is I tell them I'm going to call, please tell me some people I can call. And I guess I should talk to the cameras, because that's who asked. I say, please tell me some people whom you worked with in the past who I can call, who will talk about you. And then I'm going to look into your past and find 2 other people. So it's not a secret. I want to find out what people say about you, and not just the people you handpicked, like your cousin.
Just one important thing to add, good ideas are actually kind of easy to come up with. The hard part is executing, implementing, and then scaling. So it's not just enough to have a great idea.
And I would also add, I'm not looking for perfect people, by the way. And actually, a pretty bad reference, is something that someone might think is a bad reference could be a good reference. Like, I actually like people who are disagreeable. And so if you worked at a company and I call your boss, and your boss said, wow, he's super smart, but man, he just gets his mind on something and you just can't move him off it. And he's like super angry when things don't work. Like, I like that. So it's hard to really explain, but what I'm really looking for is the characteristic of you're smart, highly ethical. Any ethical shade, I'm just going to drop out because my life is too short. And then just tremendous hustle. I mean, the hustle is really what I'm looking for.
Questions from the room.
I'll be the mic runner.
Hi guys, thank you so much for giving this talk. So my question was related to something you guys were talking about. I think some of you mentioned, taking meetings through cold emails or cold calls or whatever. So my question is, is there any common mistake that sticks out with you in these emails, and what specifically do you guys look for?
Don't make it look like spam. These days, I'm not joking, but it gets more and more exciting, these emails. Sometimes I'm getting these emails with titles with songs, or if you missed this now, it's getting crazier and clever. Unfortunately, I don't work that way. I'm not going to take this meeting because the email looks good. What I want to know is simple things like, what market are you addressing? What's your traction so far? Why is your team the right team to work on this problem? The simple, basic things that VCs generally look for, regardless of how the meeting comes through. But don't make it too clever. Otherwise, I almost wonder if it's spam. I'm not joking.
Yeah, the way I think about it is the email should be relatively brief, and then there should be an attachment that has more length to it, and then an offer to send a lot more stuff too. So it's like, hey, here's basically speaking. I mean, I assume that more than half emails are going to be read on a phone, which means you pretty much have 30 to 45 seconds in that little window. And so you just want to say, hey, we're building a blah, and we did, and just think about what are the 2 or 3 things that are the best nuggets that you have. It's it's like I studied computer vision at Carnegie Mellon. It's like, oh, that's interesting. It's like, or whatever it is, your kind of top 3 things. And here's an attachment that tells you more. I'd love to meet if you're interested.
I will also add that these attachments, sometimes I'll get like 2 attachments, and one is a single spaced, 9-point font, solid text, monologue around what the company is. I'm not going to read that. And so I always tell folks, for me, and you may disagree, but a presentation that really, drives home the main points, they just pop out. Things are glanceable, and I'm understanding why the team is awesome and the idea is awesome. That is way more effective than what may be a really nicely well thought through piece. That's just not the moment where I'm going to invest the time to read it.
Hopping back to Twitch, common question that a few people asked, including reading these usernames is my favorite. There's Lauren Sauser or Saucer, and also Obvious Loop. Actually, I like Obvious Loop as a name. Do you give people second and third chances? So not necessarily referring to a botched pitch, but if you follow up on a promising pitch that might not have hooked you immediately. So does the market change? You go back and say, aha, this pitch that I declined at one point, maybe I'll reach out to them and there's an opportunity there. How does that work for each of your companies?
Yeah, absolutely. If I've connected with the entrepreneur and I kind of generally like what they're doing but have some feedback, if that entrepreneur comes back to me and says, hey, like I really heard what you said about this and I went and kind of dove in and now we're going to do this slightly differently, yeah, I'm going to pay attention. This person's listening, they're iterating, they're moving. That actually says a lot.
We're in the first call business, which means that if this doesn't work out, it's okay. You always start another company, and hopefully our interaction was good enough that you'll give me the first call. So I like this to be more of a long-term business relationship, kind of a conversation anyway. So yeah, absolutely. Oftentimes we want to get back to the founders and say, didn't work out this time, but definitely call us the next time, and hopefully we can work something out in the future.
Yeah, I'm going to say also yes, but I'm going to add a but at the end. So I have just this week had it happen twice where someone said, we've figured a bunch of new stuff out. It's like, great. And it's like, we figured out, this little thing. And I was like, well, why did you, and it kind of, I was like, I actually made me think I would not want to talk to that entrepreneur again because, if you're sort of wasting time, right? Like, I mean, I had a meeting, we talked about stuff, I said no, here are the reasons, and then just to be like, okay, now it's blue. I mean, that's not gonna change my mind, or it's like, we got this cool coffee maker in the office. I mean, it wasn't that bad, but I mean, the guy was actually pitching like, oh, now we're gonna start charging end customers for this solution as well. And I said, oh, great, like, how's that going? Like, we haven't done it yet. I was like, well, it's make-believe now. And so, I mean, I think, what I would say is if you have a good connection with someone and the meeting goes well, but you don't get a yes, that's okay. I mean, we're 99% no. I mean, that's our hit rate. And it's true. I mean, last year I did 400 meetings, I did 4 investments. So I'm 99% no. But there are a bunch of people who to my other panelists' comments, whom I really liked and I thought were great, and I just didn't. It wasn't the thing that moved me at that moment, right? I mean, our hard job is to make decisions. And try not to be in the most company that in the 75% area. If you're going to come back, I think it's important that you come back with some material changes.
Audience, questions? Yes. First one gets the mic.
Thank you guys for the talk. My name is Raghu Etla. I'm a co-founder of Paninian. One of the challenges we're finding in terms of wanting to be a deep tech company in the long term, especially in the belief that we are at the cusp of some curve maturing, and how easy, and we want to be in that part of ecosystem because we understand people want you to be light, they don't want to carry light assets, don't want to entrench too deep in the complex things. So how easy or how difficult, or what would be the advice you want to give for an early stage startup wanting to become that ecosystem, knowing that VCs want to determine which way you want to steer on the long term, whether you want to merge with someone else or whether how do you become part of that ecosystem without compromising that vision of being capable of being or wanting to be a deep tech company overall?
Yeah, I'll play back the question. You can tell me if I get it right. It's like how do you build a deep technology company where the real focus is on the technology without compromising that vision of being focused on tech, being tech first, having tech lead?
Yes, at the early stage, I've noticed VCs have a bunch of portfolio of their own where they see some synergies between them, and based on that, they want to steer you towards certain things.
Oh, okay.
Make the narrow.
And they're saying, and so then the second question is, okay, how do you not narrow down the focus? If you're building deep tech, how do you not narrow down the focus and stay true to the tech? I mean, look, I think, there's an old VC adage that the best technology always loses, and I think it's something that we think about a lot in the sense of, you have to build something that's world class, but if it doesn't fit into the market in a way, we're not going to have great exits. Like the best tech in Silicon Valley is in NASA, but unfortunately they don't make any money. They send people to Mars, which is cool, but so.
Yeah, I was just going to say, customers don't buy technology, right? They buy a solution that, something that solves a problem that they're facing. And so one of the things that I see again and again in companies, especially deep tech companies, is not enough focus on how they're applying this really tough technology to solving a really hard, good problem. And oftentimes what it does require to get the technology in a place where it can be usable is to narrow the focus day one and pick that really focused, good market to prove that you've got something that's new and different. And once you prove you've got that, then you earn the right to kind of go bigger and broader. So a lot of times you see more of a verticalization in the beginning. And so, I would just caution you that I agree, you don't want to necessarily have to succumb to, a bunch of investors that sort of want you to move all over the place, and that you can suss out through your diligence and working, other people who've worked with those investors. But, my takeaway from that is, they're, focus within solving a specific problem within a vertical can be a really good way to move forward.
We've got time for 2 more questions, so we're going to do one from Twitch and then one from the room.
So one from the deep depths of the internet is from user Furry McKee. So hello, Furry McKee. And Furry's question is, everyone says they have a good team, but what is the actual definition of a good team? Other than having a great username.
Well, for us, it's pretty clear in my mind anyway. There's 2 types of people I'm looking for on a team. Oftentimes, people with really good tech backgrounds. So I don't think it just has to be like PhDs from MIT or any of that, but it's just good tech background folks who've worked in the industry for a while. The more other team member that I love having on the team is, or co-founding team is someone who knows how to sell. It's very important that you have someone who knows the industry but also knows how to sell, and you've worked with each other for a while, if possible, as well. And that is a dream team for me, because now you know that I can build it, and then someone's out there hustling and selling and building the pipeline, and it's not something that any of these people are doing for the first time in the industry. If you're selling to energy companies, and if you've no background or connections in the space, it's hard. So that's why all of this matters.
I've certainly backed teams that have lots of years of experience, but I'll also say that I've backed young entrepreneurs and new teams that have no experience, and they really kind of shined bright. And the reason that I was excited by the team is that their mission and their drive and their scrappiness just stood out, and their thesis around why they were the right people to solve the problem was just really held together. And there's also a few other things, like their kind of a self-awareness around what they know and what they don't know, how they work as a team. One of the things that you should realize is we're watching and studying every move that the teams are making. It's not just how the CEO and founder is presenting, but it's how are they working with their teammates. And this is one of the reasons why we say at our firm, our partner meeting is at your office. We want to see you in your environment, and we want to see how you're interacting with all your people. And you can pull a lot out when you watch that team dynamic. Is the team empowered? Is the CEO answering all the questions, or are they saying, you know what, my head of engineering or my head of sales is really good at this. I'm going to have them explain this to you.
Yeah, I'd say there's no single formula for what defines a good team. So you have to think about what are the attributes of the team that you have, and how can you sell it the best you can. So if you're a software salesperson and you're going to sell software, it's obviously a feature that I've been selling enterprise software for 20 years to this segment. I know the customers, I know what their pain points are. If you've never sold any software in your life and you're going to create enterprise software, you're like, look, I've built this incredible software, right? and we're a team of determined hackers, and without any funding, we managed to put this product together and get 7 people who signed it into our pilots. So there are lots of different ways you can show your team and tell the best story possible around it. But you really have to tell this is why. I mean, the real question that we're asking when we're talking to you is, why is this team going to execute on this plan? Why are they going to make it? And we don't mean execute this plan, because we know this plan that you put in front of us is not what's going to happen. We don't know why, but we know it won't be. But we want to understand that no matter what happens, that you guys are going to figure it out.
We'll do one last quick question from the audience, and we'll break for lunch. I'll do the back because we've gone the front, so get a little variety. Coming to you.
Hi, I was just wondering what the structure of the financing is on the pre-seed round. Is it still safe or convertible note structure? More for you, Shruti.
Yeah, I think it's becoming more and more safes with or without caps. It depends on the founder. Firms can choose to deal that separately. But the reason it's becoming more and more safes is founders are choosing to raise $500,000 to $1 million fast by just closing a bunch of investors they want to work with, and then thinking about a proper seed round or an A round after. We talked about companies dying. This is a great time to kind of explore that, invest, and then if things don't go the way you think they're going to go, then you can sell or decide to wrap up the company without a lot of hassle and legal fees.
Yeah, I would say before I was a venture capitalist, I was a lawyer for a long time, and I did venture capital financing, probably not surprisingly. I would say this is an area where you should spend as little time as humanly possible thinking about it, right? In other words, it really doesn't matter that much. Like, you're selling X% of your company for Y dollars, move on with your life. Like, all these other, like, every second you spend thinking about all of the different structures and how the pros and cons of them, that's a time you're not building your product. I mean, your most scarce asset is actually your time. And so you're not building product, you're not recruiting a team, you're not doing anything else that's going to lead you to success. So I would say, obviously you got to think about the structure and find the right person and all those things. But I would really caution you not to spend too much time reading the blog posts and doing that.
I mean, also to that point, if you do decide to do a structured round, it becomes more of you better like this person, you're committed to this person, because it's now someone on the board often, and things that come with a proper structured round. And so I always tell founders, just do a easy, safe round and move on at this stage.
So I see things from a slightly different perspective in that I'm usually investing in the A, it's a priced round. We end up converting these safes into a priced round. And one thing that I think entrepreneurs don't pay enough attention to is if they've done a lot of safes, you forget that, okay, that's added up to a lot of money now that's going to convert in the round and will be dilution. So I've seen, not in companies that we've invested in, but I've heard horror stories from entrepreneurs that had no idea around the sticker shock of the amount of dilution they were ultimately going to take. So just make sure that you keep that in the back of your mind.
Stack notes are never good.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, both Trey, Shruti, Ted, Michelle. Round of applause for our panelists.